Hi, my name is Mark Bernot, and I'm an economist. And in this video, I want to talk about the economic inefficiencies that are dragging Russia back. And I'm going to talk about this specifically relating to the geopolitical situation in Europe. And I want to start with a story, then give you some numbers, and then we're going to draw some conclusions. The first point is, now, a few years back, I was in St. Petersburg, and this is not a village. This is like their main jewel city. And it was not all the way back in the 90s, but it wasn't just yesterday either. I had to get some medical treatment, and I'll just leave it out there as medical treatment for some incident. When I went to the specialist, the way they drew blood was they literally took a scalpel and just sliced my finger and squirted it onto slides, and I had to carry those slides up to another room. If that's their jewel city, and again, it's not the 90s, but it wasn't yesterday, how is it in the rest of Russia and the villages? And I've told you, unless you've lived under the Russian sphere of influence, unless you've lived in Russia, been there, traveled there, know the language, you can't imagine how different it is compared to the West. Maybe if you have a good IT job in Moscow, but that's few and far between. It's so different in the mentality. A lot of cronyism, bureaucracy, complications, and really this international trade that isn't the best free trade in the world slows Russia to such an extent that I keep on telling you, these boyars that control Russia, the gentry of the feudal times that control Russia, slow it down and create such an economic inertia that we're going to compare two geopolitical dollars. Why the U.S. dollar in the West doesn't mean the same thing it does in Russia in terms of expenditures. With the passage of this aid bill, $61 billion from the U.S., and Ukrainian budget for, let's say, geopolitical situation, this year is about $40 billion. Last year was even more, it was like $68 billion. And Europe's giving about $36 billion already, and they're going to get some more, and then they have, I think, up to $30 billion in humanitarian aid. Russia has $100 billion dedicated to this geopolitical event. So free people, free democracies, I don't want to call it NATO, I don't want to call it the West, it's free people have really stepped up and exceeded the total expenditures of the non-free people in Russia. But the dollar spent for a U.S.-made good or a Western-made good, okay, or a Europeans have really ingenious things. Thank you, Sweden and all these great countries. Goes much further than Russia, because $100 billion is a lot is siphoned by cronyism, capitalism, inefficiencies, misallocation of resources, lack of free trade in components. Just like in my example of medical treatment, why did they have to do it that way? Probably they were lacking the apparatus, the machines, to do proper laboratory diagnostics, as well as skilled and trained personnel. There's a huge mismatch. So when Moscow spends $100 billion, that's not the same as $61 billion. Like $61 billion could be equal to like $400 billion in Moscow expenditures because of all the inefficiencies. That $61 billion, I'll tell you right now, is teeming with great logistics, ready to go right over the border, well-oiled, tested, and trained equipment. It's almost like the Russians, they may fear you into saying they're going to conscript 100 million, or a million-man army. But they're using Napoleonic rifles in the time of rifles and sabers, or maybe even the time of musket and pikes. Augustus Adolphus, Breitenfeld, and the Swedish cavalry, compared to a modern force. So it's that mismatched. Once this U.S. and European technology, we start to get a rhythm of what is needed and what isn't, and we start to sort it out, we will above and beyond go in terms of that dollar spent compared to a Russian dollar spent. It's almost overwhelming odds. It's almost like, again, a modern organization versus a Napoleonic organization, or even a Musket and Pike scenario. It's that much of a disparity. And unless you've lived under this Russian world, and a lot of you haven't, but a lot of you, and some of you have in Europe, maybe in a sphere of influence, you don't know what I'm talking about. It's incomprehensible. You know, basically anything great was built before this great Russification. I mean, even in Poland, before communism, in the Middle Ages and before communism, all these beautiful buildings were built. And then during communism, nothing but cheap blocks of flat that are crumbling, everybody's complaining about. That is the material that Russia is working with. And the U.S., we're not even sending our best stuff. You know, the stuff from the 1990s is shooting down stuff from, you know, their best and greatest equipment. So it's only a matter of time before this archaic, you know, fife and drum, rifle and saber, musket and pike organization will be overrun. Maybe not specifically in terms of land, but in terms of a geopolitical event that will cave the Russian political structure. And we're waiting for that. So I always like to give a hopeful message because I am hopeful, because I am very realistic. I've been there, I've seen it, I know it. And that's why I can be hopeful. For people who are not as hopeful, they haven't lived under that reality. So, peace and love. My name is Mark Biernat. I'm a monetary economist. Have a great day. Thank you very much.